My name's Tim Brown. I work at Twickenham Police Station, and when I heard about this film, I thought it was an opportunity to discuss ways that we can better serve people with autism, to make sure that, one, we're able to obtain evidence from them when they're witnesses, and also to make sure that we have the correct response to them in the rare occasion where they become a suspect in crime. If we're obtaining evidence, our primary job is to collect information from somebody and write that down in a way that is communicable to the court. If that person has an issue with communicating with us or with anybody, it's going to be extremely difficult to obtain their free thoughts without guiding them or sending them down a particular way.
Many people with autism, they have difficulty recollecting and difficulty reporting something very accurately. So to make a statement is going to be very, very difficult. Someone with autism may have very limited language, but other people appear to have very good language skills, but they have difficulty understanding the non-verbal aspects of communication. So people can appear much more able and their difficulties might not be apparent. They will also use language in a very different way. For example, one man I know, if you asked him what he had for lunch that day, he would say fish and chips, which is a great answer, but it's actually not what he had. So he's answering the questions, but he's not giving us the answer that we want. People also can take things very literally. If you ask someone to take a seat, they might think, well, where should I take it? If you are asking questions, give someone time to process that information. Don't sort of suggest answers because it might be very suggestible. Maybe write the questions down, have visual materials.
We need to take advantage of any assistance we can. So if there's family members there, ask a family member to assist with communication. I think will take a lot of the stress out of the situation for the person, and it's most likely to allow us to obtain best evidence. If we're going into somebody's house, which we do all of the time, if we're rushing them to try and get the information, that would cause anyone an elevated amount of stress, but someone who's got a sort of heightened flight or fight response, clearly that's going to escalate matters and potentially cause physical confrontation and all sorts of things which could have been avoided had we taken more time and recognised the traits in that person.
If someone doesn't recognise that someone has autism, they might not recognise when someone is getting a little bit more anxious, and the person might engage in challenging behaviour because they feel afraid or frightened of what's happening, and then people can make the situations worse. So if somebody's got sensory sensitivities and someone goes to touch them to get them out of a situation, that person might react in a way that you wouldn't expect them to.
We'll often have to give instruction, telling someone to be quiet and stop arguing with someone else, telling someone to look at us and listen to us, instructing them to turn the music down or the television off. Sometimes, some of those things may be crutches that they use to curb their own anxiety, so perhaps music being on will help them to communicate with us. Or if they're looking at a television screen, that doesn't mean they're not listening necessarily. A useful thing to do is always to try and use that person's name before asking them a question so that they know that question is directed to them. Ultimately, explaining, I think, everything that we're doing before we do it.
If you think about if you didn't know what was happening next and you were worried about social interactions, you were worried about how someone might perceive you, all of these things, you would probably feel very anxious and worried too. So it's about how do we alleviate that for the people we're supporting? How do we help people feel less anxious? And a lot of that goes to forward planning. And just making sure that people know what's first, what's next, what's going to happen, and lots of practice and repetition of these situations that can be more anxiety-provoking.
The police station waiting room is not a great place, and there's often lots of people who potentially are stressed of their own or intoxicated. Most police stations have a closed off room where someone can sit quietly and talk to an officer in private. The way that I think that we can improve, really, is to better advocate that we now as a service will come and see you at your home. It's a much less pressured environment. And because it's diarised, it's easier, I think, for the person who's contacting police to arrange an advocate to be there with them, to assist in communication with us and to help us achieve best evidence. One of the limitations of our risk assessments in custody is that we don't have access to people's medical backgrounds at all. And so all risk assessments are carried out through asking people questions. And it's a big long list of questions as well. And that is why I think as soon as anyone in the custody situation has the slightest feeling that someone might be on the spectrum and need that help, we need that member of family or advocate there.
I mean, people with autism are very easily influenced and manipulated.
So people quite often fall in with crowds that might not be the most desirable for them to hang out with and then get into trouble in that way. They can also perceive situations slightly different, so not fully understand certain rules and then get into trouble in that way.
There are significant hurdles in custody. To anybody, it's a stressful experience. I mean, you've been detained, brought into a strange environment, noise and bright lighting, all of the things which I think can really heighten stress. The skill for us is to recognise, I think, where someone might have additional learning needs and to make sure we cater for those.
We were driving through Teddington and a road was cordoned off and Alan was upset because the road wasn't open. There was a policeman standing with his car at the end of this particular road, so Alan decided to widen the car window down and shout out at the officer, "What's going on?" So I had to briefly explain and said, he has autism, just don't worry about it, but that sort of thing can happen. It could be construed as somebody being nosy, somebody being obstructive, but he wasn't. He was just anxious because the road was shut. And of course he has special interests, which a lot of people on the spectrum do have. He likes things, for example, like traffic lights. If he sees a traffic light, he is very much driven to go and press the buttons. And he's got no idea of road sense either. Now, for example, I have to remind him when he's crossing the road to say, the green man might be on, but the traffic hasn't necessarily stopped. And say, for example, you've got an ambulance coming down the road or a police car coming down the road. They can go straight through the red lights. But Alan wouldn't realise that. And because the green man says, go for me, I go, regardless of what's coming. So it means I always have to be on the alert to make sure he's safe. He doesn't appear to learn from the experience. He's so driven by his special interests. That is the be-all and end-all at the time.